Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the subcommittee, the full licensing committee, to hear today's application regarding cost cutters, 6 Dunyeats Road, Broadstone. So to begin with, I ask, please, my name is Councillor Judy Butt, and I'm chair of the licensing committee, and thus I'm the person presiding at this meeting. And may I please hear a nomination for chairman of this subcommittee? Thank you.
Happy to propose yourself, Chairman. Chair, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Flagg. May I have a seconder, please?
I'm very happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. So elected, we will continue and we will go on to housekeeping. I'd like to ask my clerk, please, Jill Hollyoak, if she would deal with the housekeeping.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting of the Licensing Subcommittee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to by the Chair. State your name before you speak if you have not been introduced by name. Please ensure that you unmute yourself and always turn on the video function before speaking. Mute your microphone when you are not talking. After each party has made their representation, the Chair will ask each person in turn if they have any questions or comments. However, if at any point you would like to speak again, please use the raise your hand function at the top right of the screen. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the. Thank you.
And we now move to apologies. Apologies, please, Jill.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Julie Bagwell.
Thank you.
And Councillor Flagg is here as the first reserve member.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for Councillor Flagg for standing in as first reserve. Thank you, Councillor Flagg. So now we move to item 3, which is declarations of interest. And if you check your agendas, this is outlined on the flow chart on page 2 with regard to any interests. Are there any declarations of interest? I'll take in turn. Councillor Burton?
No interest.
Thank you. Councillor Flagg?
No declarations of interest, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flagg, and there are none from myself, so there are no declarations of interest from the members for reference. Thank you. So the protocol for public speaking is at agenda item 4, and please note that a revised protocol for virtual meeting has been circulated with the agenda sheet, and I hope that you're all in keeping of that. So we move on now to the substantive. Agenda item 7 has been withdrawn by the applicant, so we move to item 5, which is cost cutters. So an application has been received for a new premises licence for the premises known as Cost Cutter 6 Dunyeats Road, Poole, BH18 8AG. And due to objections received by other persons, this matter is brought before the licensing subcommittee for determination. So before we start, I will ask each participant to introduce themselves and state their role. So I will start with myself. My name is Councillor Judy Butt. I am chairman of the licensing committee and I am chairman of this subcommittee for today's purposes, and I am ward councillor for Creekmore, Hilborn and Waterloo. I will now move to Councillor Burton.
Hello, I'm Councillor Richard Burton. I'm a ward councillor for Bearwood and Merley and member of this committee today. Thank
you, Councillor Burton. And Councillor Flagg?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor David Flagg, representing the Burton Grange ward. I'm a full member of the licensing committee and reserve member for this morning's meeting.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flagg, and we're very grateful to you. So I move now to Sarah Rogers. Sarah.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Rogers. I'm Senior Licensing Officer for BCP Council.
Thank you, Sarah. And Mr. Walsgrove, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Good morning. I'm John Walsgrove and I'm the solicitor representing Cost Cutter.
Thank you very much. And Linda Cole.
Good morning. It's Linda Cole. I'm the solicitor advising the committee today.
Thank you, Linda. And Jill Hollyoak.
I'm Jill Hollyoak. I'm clerking this subcommittee today.
Thank you, Jill. And Councillor Vicky Slade.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Vicky Slade. I represent Broadstone Ward and have been asked by a number of the objectors to represent their views. I've also submitted my own comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. Could I just ask that the representations you are here on behalf of are Mrs. Girling, Mrs. Jones,
Gurley, Mrs. Jones, Mr. Kandasamy and Mr. and Mrs. Williams.
Thank you. We just wanted some clarification with regard to Mrs. Jones because she came from a wider remit. I believe it was the Waterman House Forum.
Yeah, Mrs. Jones lives in Waterman House but was representing the Waterman House Residents Forum. They are the people that live in the block. Thank you,
Councillor Slade, and you in turn are representing her, representing them. Thank you very much. Thank you. We also have other people who have made representations who may well be listening on YouTube. So just to thank them for their representations, and they were Mr. Philip Winfield, Mr. Chris Turndrup, Mr. West, Mr. Kangathpan, and Mr. and Mrs. Harris, and Mr. PJ Wood. So if you are listening, thank you for your representations. They will be taken in turn. So in addition, Democratic Services officers are providing technical support to the meeting, but take no part in the hearing. So item 6, before I do run through the procedure, may I check that 3 things. All persons who have given notice of their intention to speak have been identified. Any person who wishes to withdraw representation or wishes not to speak has been identified, and that parties of the proceedings have all the documents as stated with regard to the application. Are we all happy? I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. That's fine. Thank you very much. So going on to item 7, then I will explain the proposed procedure regarding the order of speaking for the hearing. So firstly, the licensing officer, who will be Sarah Rogers, will present the case. The applicant will make the application, and that will be Mr. John Walsgrove on behalf of Mr. Kumar for cost cutters. There'll be questions of the applicant, and members of the committee subcommittee will go first. They are as read today, which is Councillor Burton and Councillor Flagg. There are no responsible authorities, so other persons will then make their representations. There will be questions of the other persons by members of the subcommittee who will go first. And then we will hear from Councillor Vicky Slade, who is our ward member for Broadstone, and she's representing the following persons who we have already heard. Then all parties will be given an opportunity to sum up, with the party who spoke last to go first. So that will be Councillor Vicky Slade, who will speak first, then Mr. Walsgrove, and then Sarah Rogers. The hearing will then conclude, and the subcommittee will deliberate in private with our legal advisor, Linda Cole, and our clerk, Jill Hollyoak. Notification of the subcommittee's decision will be given within the period of 5 working days, beginning with the day or the last day on which the hearing was held, which is today, in accordance with the regulations. This is with regard to COVID, agenda item 4. The notification of decision will include information about the right of appeal as appropriate. So I will now ask all the parties involved to confirm agreement that the proposed procedure is acceptable. And I will ask first Sarah Rogers, are you happy? Nodding, okay.
Yes.
Mr. Walsgrove, perhaps I'll look, and if you nod, that's fine. And Councillor Slade. Good, we have 3 nodding heads, right. So moving on then to item 8, may I just please remind all parties speaking not to repeat the information which they have already given in writing, but to expand on their written representations. All questions are to be asked through the chairman, and there will be no cross-examination of the parties. So moving on then to item 9, I will ask the licensing officer to present the report with regard to cost cutters. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. The application before you is for the grant of a premises licence for a convenience store where the provision of alcohol is requested. The applicant has therefore requested the supply of alcohol for consumption off the premises between the hours of 7 AM and 11 PM each day of the week. No application has been sought for any regulated entertainment nor the provision of late night refreshment. As a result of the consultation, 11 representations were received on the grounds that to grant the application would undermine the licensing objectives. You'll see in my report that I mentioned 12 representations, however, one's been withdrawn. No representations were received from any of the responsible authorities. Should the application be granted and the applicant fails to operate in accordance with their licence and the conditions attached to it, they will be aware that any of the responsible authorities or any other person may request a review of the licence at any time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, before we move on to the applicant making their application, are there any questions and point of fact for Sarah Rogers? Councillor Burton?
No, not at this moment, thank you.
Councillor Flagg?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flagg. So I will now invite the applicant or Mr. Walsgrove on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Kumar, to put forward his application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start by offering Mr. Kumar's apology for not being able to attend the meeting this morning. He is in fact undertaking the post office training, which is a 4-day intensive course, and he wasn't able to rearrange that, and so is attending that today. So his apologies. He obviously would have liked to have been here. As you heard from your licensing officer, it's an application effectively for an off licence for a convenience store. Hours that we've asked for are 7 AM until 11 PM. And Mr. Kumar is an independent retailer, but he's supported by Cost Cutter, and effectively Cost Cutter will be the fascia of the shop, the products within it, and they offer support to Mr. Kumar in his retailing. But it's important that the committee are aware that all decisions around the management of that shop are with Mr. Kumar, and so all the responsibility is his, and he will have day-to-day management of these premises. I'm sure the committee are familiar with the concept of convenience retailing. It's about offering customers the opportunity of purchasing goods in a one-stop shop experience. And of course, there is a convenience chain called One Stop. Now, that's around having a selection of core products available to customers for that one-stop shop experience. And so convenience retailers will have as essential core products newspapers and magazines, fresh food, dairy products, milk, cheese, those sorts of things, cigarettes and alcohol. So although alcohol is a core product of that convenience retailing, it actually accounts for quite a small percentage of the turnover of the premises. So generally speaking, and this is based on Mr. Kumar's experience of his own shops, which I'll come on to in a moment, his gross sales of alcohol would only make up about 8 to 9% of the overall turnover of the store. However, if you removed alcohol, so for example, if you did not grant this license today and he opened up the shop, he would see approximately a 35% reduction in sales, because people would go elsewhere where they could get everything under the one roof. It's a situation today where people like convenient shopping. They don't like having to go to 2 or more shops to get their goods that they want. Now, he appreciates that although therefore the alcohol sales are a small part, it is nonetheless an absolutely fundamental and vital part of convenience retailing, and he appreciates the privilege that a premises license gives him and the responsibility that it carries, that he must ensure that he complies with the law and promotes the licensing objectives. And just to give this committee comfort of his experience, he already has 2 convenience stores, not within your area, but within Portsmouth City Council's area. So he has a shop in Southsea, which he's had since 2014, and that in fact has a late licence until midnight during the week and then 2 AM on Friday and Saturdays. And he also has another one in the city of Portsmouth, which he's had for about the last 6 or 7 months, where he has a premises licence from 6 AM in the morning until midnight. Now, both of those stores are in very heavy residential areas, as is the subject matter of today's application. And of course, it's the nature of the beast that convenience stores are placed within residential areas. That's the whole point. It's to allow the local community to be able to walk to the shops and have that convenience of a very short trip between home and the shop and getting what they need. You will see that not only is he the applicant for the licence, but also for the designated premises supervisor. And as I said, he will have day-to-day hands-on management of this store. I would say that the two licences he's had absolutely no issues with since he's operated them. Both applications were opposed by local residents, as is this one, with very similar concerns being expressed by residents of what they feared may happen if those shops sold alcohol. And I'm pleased to say that he's had, since opening those shops, absolutely no issues at all. He's had no complaints from local residents, and he's had no involvement from responsible authorities regarding any concerns that he's not complying with the terms and conditions of his licence. Coming on to those terms and conditions, you've seen from the operating schedule in the licence those conditions that he's offered. Just to expand on those, the CCTV will be internal and external, and as you would expect will be a high quality digital system which will be recording, and obviously he would comply with any request to provide footage from the police or local authority. He operates Challenge 25 in his two other shops, and that's what he intends to do here. And that forms part of the staff training so that they're all aware that that's the policy. And of course, there will be appropriate signage within the store relating to Challenge 25 so that customers are also aware that that is his policy. As you would expect with an off licence, they will have a refusal log. So if any person is ever refused the sale of alcohol, that will be logged by the staff and recorded. And again, those records will be made available to the police or local authority. And the final condition he offers is the one not to sell high strength beers, ciders and lagers. He has that in his two shops in Portsmouth. That local authority are very keen to reduce the strength campaign, and I know this council is the same, and he's more than happy to offer that as a condition. Those have similar impact on his two shops, and as I said, he's demonstrated by his 6 years of trading that he can comply with licence conditions, and so there's no suggestion, I would say, that he wouldn't do so if you granted the licence. In terms of the hours that he's applied for, because that seemed to be perhaps the biggest area of contention with the residents, some of whom said, well, we don't really have objection to the licence being granted, but what we don't want is for the later hours, and some had suggested times that you might like to consider. I would just like to remind the committee that under the old Act, the 1964 Licensing Act, off-licence hours were set in statute. There wasn't any discretion to grant either shorter or longer hours, and the government had fixed those hours for off licences as 8 to 11 weekdays and up to 10:30 on Sundays. So for over 40 years, every off licence in the UK operated those hours. So in essence, what Mr. Kumar is asking for in this application is an extra hour in the morning from 7 till 8, and also that extra 30 minutes on a Sunday till 11. So in essence, he's not here asking for late hours. He's not asking for the midnight or 2 o'clock that he's got in Portsmouth. He's asking for 11 o'clock, which I would say is a perfectly reasonable hour. And to support that contention, if I refer the committee to paragraph 8.66 of the section 182 guidance, and that talks about when minor variations of licenses can be made. And within that paragraph, it says that if you're varying an off licence between the hours of 7 AM and 11 PM, that can be dealt with by a minor variation. And I would say that supports my contention that these hours are not considered by national government to be excessive or late or likely to cause a negative impact on the licensing objectives or the communities within which these premises are situated. Within your own policy, there is nothing which would suggest that hours should be more limited in relation to these premises, and alongside that, I would refer you again to the Section 182 guidance, paragraph 10.15, and I'll just read that to you. It says that shops should normally be free to provide sales of alcohol for consumption off the premises, unless there are good reasons based on the licensing objectives for restricting those hours. Now, coming on to what the residents have to say, again, referring to the Section 182 guidance, paragraph 9.43, that says that your determination should be evidence-based. And obviously there's a general legal proposition that he who asserts must prove. And so I would ask, when you consider the written representations of the residents and the oral representations from Councillor Slade, you have that in mind, whether there is actually any credible evidence put forward to restrict the hours, because as I say, national government say shops should be allowed to sell alcohol all the time they're open. And that's another point which you should also bear in mind. The shop opening hours is governed effectively by planning, not by a licensing committee. Your function is to decide what hours the shop should sell alcohol. And it's clear to me that a lot of the residents don't want this shop open longer than it currently is. I think the post office is currently closing at 5 p.m. and they just don't want a late night shop there. Well, that isn't a matter for the committee. It's not for you to say that the shop must close its doors at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. Mr. Kumar will be able to trade the convenience store whenever he chooses to, providing it's not in breach of any planning restriction, and the hours he's applied for certainly aren't in breach of any planning. In addition to that, the residents have raised a number of matters which you as an experienced committee will know cannot be taken into account. So things like demand and need are not relevant to a licensing committee. Parking, light nuisance, waste, none of those relate to the sale of alcohol and the licensable activity. And again, are matters which relate to the operation of these premises as a shop, and those are all planning matters. What has been raised by residents is obviously the fear that this grant of a licence may lead to crime and disorder, antisocial behaviour and or public nuisance. And those, of course, are matters all within your remit and which you will have to discuss. In support of my client's application and in terms of credible evidence to put before you, I do ask you to attach weight to the fact that the responsible authorities have not objected, and in particular that the police have not objected. So your own policy at paragraph 13.1 states that the committee will look to Dorset Police as the main source of advice on crime and disorder. But in addition to the police not objecting and dealing with that licensing objective, I'd also draw your attention to the fact that the Environmental Health Officer has not raised any concern, nor your own licensing authority. And to further support why you should attach weight to that, paragraph 9.12 of the Section 182 guidance states that each responsible authority will be an expert in their respective field. So I'm asking you to attach weight to expert opinions that have raised no concerns with this committee that the licensing objectives would have any negative impact should you grant this licence. And lastly, as you heard from the licensing officer, there is a power under the Licensing Act for any licence to be reviewed at any time by any person. And I would suggest to you that this would allow a committee to apply a light touch to the application on the basis that, given what the residents have written in their representations, in my respectful view, would be expressions of fear of what might happen, as opposed to being based on any credible evidence that it either currently is happening or would certainly happen. The power to review the licence, which is a swift action and can be brought back to the committee, should give everybody the confidence that Mr. Kumar operating this shop is not going to have that negative impact on crime and disorder, public nuisance, public safety and the protection of children from harm. As I say, he's proved himself as a responsible operator for many years, operating similar licensed premises. Both the stores in Portsmouth are cost cutters. And as I say, he has the support of a national retailer behind him to assist him in running the store. So on that basis, I would ask that you do grant the licence as we've applied for the hours 7 AM to 11 PM. And naturally, I'm happy to answer any questions you've got, but I'll leave my presentation there for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grove. Members, are there any questions at this moment in time for Mr. Walsgrove? Councillor Burton.
No questions at this moment in time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Flagg, any questions at this moment in time?
Yes, please, Chair, if I may. Mr. Walsgrove, the accompanying plan on the application, it shows basically there are two shelving bays behind the counter, which clearly the members of the public do not have access to. But the legend shows the two end bays on the middle gondolas as promotion shelf, and the legend has the same notification as the rear bays, showing a diagonal red line, which, you know, my understanding is then that alcohol is going to be placed on those end bays. How is the applicant going to ensure that the alcohol, if stored on those end bays, is not available to the members of the public between the hours of I think it's 6 till 7? And I can't. Please forgive me. I can't recall the time at the end of the day when the alcohol is not available. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flagg. And to be helpful, it's 6 AM till midnight, I think, is the time you were looking for. Thank you, Councillor Flagg. Mr. Walsgrove, thank you.
Yes, so currently his intention would be to operate the store 7 to 11. So yes, on the application he has put later and earlier opening hours of 6 until midnight, but his intention would be that the store's only going to operate 7 to 11. But outside those hours, just like his other two shops where he has a licence which is less than the hours he opens, there would always be two members of staff working within the premises, and obviously they will know what hours they're able to sell alcohol, and it's simply a case of advising customers that they're not able to purchase alcohol during those times. It wouldn't be a question of him removing that stock from those shelves. It would simply be that it wouldn't be able to be rung through the tills.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Flagg?
Well, just from my experience, I know in the past where alcohol is served from fridges, they normally have a thermal curtain which is drawn down so that prevents members of the public from actually accessing the alcohol. My point was that those shelves at the end of those two gondolas are merely shelves, and I just wondered if there was going to be a system, if Mr. Kumar was going to introduce a system of being able to shut those shelves off. That was merely my question.
Yes, it's a question well put, and I will take this further. Thank you, Councillor Flagg, for raising it in the first instance. The plan is extremely confusing, Mr. Walsgrove. I'm not at all happy with the plan. We have the legend, the key, and we have various colours. It looks like some form of diagonal brickwork which says alcohol area, but that doesn't appear on the plan anywhere. So as far as I'm concerned, I can't see where the alcohol is going to be kept. We then have alcohol fridge, which is a very, very, very fine diagonal red line. Again, I can't see that unless it's me. And then we have promotion shelf, which we have 4 blocks, which are on the aisles or stands directly opposite the till. So could you take us around the plan and tell us exactly where things are going to be, please, because you will have more knowledge of this than we do if we are only looking at this key. Thank you. Mr. Wellsgrove, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a shame Mr. Kumar can't attend because obviously he would be able to deal with that. I've only been supplied with the plan from his architect. I have to confess I'm not 100% sure where Mr. Kumar intends to place his alcohol. All I can say is from my experience of his other 2 shops, as you see, the spirits are always kept behind the counter, and generally the rest of the alcohol, apart from a fridge, would also be behind the counter. So where you've got the spirits directly behind the person stood behind the till, to the left of that would be the wines and beers, and then at the end of the counter there would be the fridges where the beers are. I can't say 100% for sure where alcohol may be placed other than in those locations. Obviously I had to deal with Councillor Flagg's question because clearly the plan does suggest that alcohol may be stored on those shelves in front of the tills, which are away from the doors, so not not easy access for shop theft, because I know that the police are always concerned about how close to the doors alcohol would be kept. But in terms of the store, you can see it's not a particularly large convenience store, and as I said, alcohol only forms a small part of the business. I would be surprised, entirely surprised, if all of that space were given over to alcohol, but I'm really sorry, I can't give you a definitive answer because Mr. Kumar's not here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wellsgrove. I won't leave you struggling with that any longer. Thank you so much for trying to cover that. It's much appreciated. I'd like to ask a question, if I may. With regard to staffing, obviously staffing is important with regard to the public safety and undertaking the 4 licensing objectives. Mr. Kumar is at sub-postmaster training, I believe, today. So is it intended that he intends to be the sub-postmaster and also the DSM? And what staffing ratio will there be to ensure that the shop is safely looked after? Thank you.
You're right. The intention is he will be the sub postmaster, and as I've said, there will always be a minimum of 2 persons working within the store. On occasions, 3, depending on the time of day, the day of the week, and how trade goes. Obviously, for Mr. Kumar, he has to ensure, because of the standards required by the post office, that the premises is at all times obviously secure and well managed with adequate staffing levels. So not only does he have the regulation from the licensing committee, but there is substantial regulation from the post office as to how the shop should be run. So I can assure you there will always be adequate members of staff in there.
Thank you very much for that assurance that everything will be under strict regulation. Councillor Burton, did you want to come back in now? Do you have a question now, or later on perhaps?
No, I'm fine at the moment, thank you, Chair.
I have one more. It's not so much a question, it's just an observation. You advised us with regard to gross sales that they would be, with regarding to alcohol, 8 to 9%. However, if we were so minded not to grant this alcohol licence today, then there would be a 35% reduction in sales. Well, I just need to advise and obviously remind everybody that the financial matters are not a consideration of this licence, so we wouldn't be able to take that part of the information you gave into consideration, because whether this is a financial going concern or not is not a matter under the Licensing Act, so we wouldn't be able to consider that. So just to give you that observation.
Can I just make the point why I mentioned that? It's simply to say that this will be a convenience store full of a wide range of products, and alcohol is just a small part of it. It is an important part, which is why so much effort is put into the due diligence around it, because he knows how important it is to him. I appreciate the financials are irrelevant, but that was the point I was trying to make.
Yes, and the point with regard to the percentage being low was well taken, Mr. Walsgrove. Thank you for making that point. So if there are no further questions then for Mr. Walsgrove, Sarah, did you have any questions for Mr. Walsgrove with regard to points of fact?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Walsgrove, thank you very much for those submissions. We will now go on. There are no responsible authorities, as you've outlined to us, who've raised any objections, but we do have other persons. And today we have Councillor Vicky Slade with us, who is making representation on behalf of 4 of her residents, and one of her residents, Mrs. Joyce Jones, has further representation of Waterman House Forum, so a group of people within there. So, Councillor Slade, when you're ready, please, we're happy to hear your submission. Take the time you wish, Councillor Slade. There are no timings. OK, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butt. You have all presumably read all of the submissions, and as per the instructions earlier, I'm not going to go through them all. There is a lot of overlap between them. There are some specific things that different people have raised, which I'll just go into in a little more detail, and then I will cover the main issues that, as I see them, as a collective of those things and of my own observations at the end, if that's okay, just to keep things simple. Mrs. Girling, as well as Mrs. Jones, are both residents at Waterman House. Mrs. Girling lives directly above the unit in question and has particular concerns about the direct impact of this unit effective change of use. I realise in legal terms it's not a change of use because it still falls under a retail use, but the actual operational change of use on the life of the people who are living in a retirement complex. The concerns about the disturbance, not just in terms of noise and potential antisocial behaviour, but also in terms of the units being occupied from light, etc., during the evening. The other thing which Miss Girling did attempt to send in was evidence of vehicles which occasionally park on the frontage because there is no parking associated with this unit, and that we already see occasional vehicles on that frontage. They are during the day, and therefore their impact is minimised. Mrs. Jones has raised some issues which I recognise are not licensing submissions, which is around the number of premises, and I have explained to her that those are not issues that are relevant, but she is very concerned about the adverse impact on the quality of life of people who have chosen to retire to that development, and almost a breach of trust really around this going from a quiet place to live to somewhere which is now going to become a haven for very many hours, extended hours to what they're used to. Mr. Kandasami's request for me to speak on his behalf. Mr. Kandasamy does run a business in Broadstone. He is concerned about the impact on other premises. He has also raised an issue with me that other premises have had their times restricted in terms of their hours to sell alcohol, and feels that it would be inappropriate not to put similar restrictions on. I don't have access to the details of the other licences to be able to check that, but there are concerns about in the other areas where late licences are used. And the only other place in Broadstone that has a licence late into the evening, or uses its licence late into the evening, is Tesco Express. that there is antisocial behaviour that takes place outside of Tesco's on a regular basis. They do have an issue with theft, with a lot of litter, noise and gathering of people on the benches. And there is similar facilities to do so outside of this unit, with a very large expanse outside which could attract gatherings of groups. So those were his concerns. And Mr and Mrs Williams have raised similar concerns, but they've also made particular reference to the lack of parking, which I recognise is not one of the 4 licensing issues, but the parking issues for me are around road safety, and therefore road safety and crime does bring it into the 4 licensing objectives as the way I would interpret it, with having no external parking. They are the nature of the 4 people who've asked me to speak, but I'm going to run through a more generic perspective. While I have spoken to a lot of people about this particular application, and I've stressed to people that the only relevant matters are the 4 licensing objectives, there is a lot of concern about the impact of this particular site, not only on direct neighbours, also on the wider community, on road safety and potential antisocial behaviour. The site is currently a post office with a very small amount, 2 shelves, I would say, of general groceries, literally bread, milk and chocolate generally, and things like cards and stationery. When this development was built and approved, it was, and I believe Councillor Butt may well have been on planning committee at the time that this went through, it was an absolute commitment that the post office was going to be one of the units, of the 2 commercial units as part of the development. I have assured the residents that there is every intention to retain the post office, and I've also explained that the best hope of retaining a post office into the 21st century and beyond is by incorporating it within a convenience store, because of the changing nature of the post office. But there is a feeling that the post office as a facility and as a community asset, and it is detailed in the planning application as a community asset, is the primary use of this site. And from the plan I've seen, there doesn't appear to be any intention to maintain a significant post office. What appears from the map, from the plan, is a store counter over which you can still do post office transactions. And if you look at the existing post office facility, which has 2 glass secure booths with safes, with access to travel money, and then 2 or possibly even 3 additional protected areas for the counter. The significance of the post office in this unit is significantly reduced and fundamentally changed. And whilst he will be undergoing and is undergoing sub-postmaster training, I think it may well end up that actually it's an ancillary to this. The other concern I have heard, which worries me, is talking about this as an off licence. My understanding is this is going to be a cost-cutter convenience store, and therefore to talk of it continually as an off licence and talk about off licences rules it flies in the face of a commitment to be a convenience store that sells alcohol rather than an off licence that sells convenience items. And I would like the committee to take that into consideration. When this development was built, there was no parking. And I've read through the planning papers, and this was mitigated because the post office and the money vans, the only people that were delivering to this site, would be allowed to go on the frontage and use the pavement because they were secure vehicles. There is no rear access to this building for deliveries. And as a convenience store selling significant amounts of alcohol, this is going to require significant vehicle movements to service a convenience store that are currently not there. And there are no facilities for which to do that. So there are concerns here about safety aspects, both at the front, where are these HGV lorries going to park? Currently, there are small vans, and the postmaster currently pops to Macros to buy a few bits to fill his shelves. So there's no explanation about how that is going to be managed. The most important thing is I was told by the current postmaster and by occupants of the Waterman House development that the lease is restricted to a 10 p.m. close. I've just had a look at the planning application. Condition 19 of the planning application that was approved in 2015 and 2016 states that the commercial units cannot operate before 7 p.m. or after 8 p.m. any day. And so there is real fear and worry by local people that having moved into a building which had clear conditionality that there would be 2 retail units open during the day only, that they are now going to be blighted by a premises lit and active until very late at night, directly beneath a retirement unit. Whether the licensee is planning to open at 6 a.m, that is again earlier than the planning condition. Opening beyond 8 p.m. and midnight is really quite outrageous. There's nowhere in Broadstone that you can buy anything at midnight. You cannot buy a pint of milk at midnight in Broadstone. And to introduce a unit where you can buy items without access to parking, disturbing the peace at midnight is really quite shocking. And I was under the impression mistakenly that the opening hours being requested were 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. To hear that they're 6 a.m. to midnight fills me with complete horror. And my request is that should you be minded to grant an alcohol licence, this is treated as a convenience store that sells alcohol and not an off licence that sells a bit of bread. And I'm really concerned about that. I'm of the opinion, as are the residents, that should this be granted, the opening hours of the store should not exceed 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. because that is what the planning condition stated. And therefore, even though you could grant a licence outside of that and then it isn't used, it would be most useful that the licence conditions and the planning conditions lined up and that the people who live in Broadstone were given the respect that they should have been granted from purchasing those properties, that they're not disturbed, that antisocial behaviour is limited. It's great to hear he's having CCTV, but that frontage outside of those 2 units is going to be a gathering place for many people who would otherwise not be there. So I would ask you to take those things into consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Slade. Before we continue, I'd just like Linda, legal advice, please, or just legal confirmation with regard to how planning and licensing work contemporaneously and how one is not reliant on the other, because I think there is some, not confusion, but there are some concerns by Councillor Slade that planning will have an impetus on this application. So could I please have the clarification that we are at liberty to set any hours we so wish, and that is not affected by the previous planning committee decision. Thank you, Linda.
Yes, sir. So the situation with planning and licensing is that they are 2 separate regulatory functions, and when applications are being considered for either, that they do consider separate things. So the licensing committee today, the subcommittee today, you are restricted to considering what the licensing objectives are rather than the hours that are put on the license by planning application, but the premises has to align both themselves. So they won't be able to use their license as such, or they shouldn't use it for any sale of alcohol after the hours that they're restricted to open by planning. But they are different considerations when you make your decision on the hours that are given. You have to look at the evidence and the reps before you.
That's very useful, Linda. What that boils down to, Councillor Slade, is that if it is different, if the hours are less on the planning application, then the applicant will need to go back to planning to amend those hours. Is that okay, Councillor Slade?
I do understand that, and it does seem it is in your gift to still make the decision that you consider that the impact from the planning objective, sorry, the licensing objectives to be significant enough that you would not wish there to be the sale of alcohol early in the morning or into the evening, and therefore to choose to give those limited hours that are relevant to a convenience store and not to an off licence. On the basis that we are not dealing with the old licensing law, we are dealing with the current licensing law. And the reference that was made was 30 years ago, you could have whatever the hours of an off licence. Well, the reason that licensing law was changed was so that there was an ability to have different hours. And my request to you is that you exercise those rights. That's my request. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Slade, and indeed we shall be certainly debating and looking at that. So, councillors, members, do you have any questions for Councillor Slade on points of fact or on points of within the submission as given? Councillor Flagg.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, while discussions have been taking place, I just had a quick look on the internet with regards to the combi counter, and clearly that's something that's approved by the Post Office network across the country, you know, for small establishments. So, you know, I don't have a problem with the fact that you know, that combi counter is there to serve the members of the public in terms of Post Office transactions. Thank you.
That's useful. Thank you very much, Councillor Flagg, for looking that up and for sharing your observations. Councillor Burton, do you have any questions at this moment?
No, thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. It was not so much a question, Councillor Slade, but again an observation with regards to you raised about parking and about how parking can cause antisocial behaviour. Can cause road safety issues, which I would agree with. Selfish parking can indeed. But could you advise me as to how people manage at the moment with regard to visiting the post office? Because as far as I can see it, the service parking there for visiting the post office and that parade of shops for Marks and Spencer's, Tesco's is in fact what we all know very close to our hearts, Councillor Slade, as the toast rack. And it does extend quite near to Cost Cutters. It's about as far away from Cost Cutters, I believe, if we look on Google, as it is from Marks and Spencer's and Tesco's. There's not too much difference. So I was wondering, what do people do at the minute if they want to pop to the post office? Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you. I'm afraid your measurements are rather out, because there is what is locally known as the mini toast rack, which is directly outside Tesco Express and Marks and Spencer. So you are literally outside. The toast rack, there is parking within, I don't know, maybe 50 metres of the post office, 100 metres. I'm not good on my distances, but people walk to the post office. There are 2 spaces around the into Dunyeats Road where people will stop if they do need to access it. They're disabled spaces. They were put in as disabled spaces so that those with disabilities and couldn't walk from the local car parks would be able to still use the post office. The concern that's been raised is that if a premises is open at a time where there is nothing else open and there are few people around, we are already seeing a temptation by people to hop up on that very wide pavement and dump their car there. We have had the traffic warden give tickets there for people who are causing a real danger. It is a busy roundabout, obviously with double yellow line, so nobody attempts to park on the roundabout, but we do see people who are choosing to go onto that wide pavement and that frontage, and that to me is potentially dangerous and is obviously also a criminal offence.
That's useful, thank you very much. I was wondering how far the premises away from your swimming pool car park?
It is across the road from the swimming pool car park.
So do people from using the post office will sometimes...
Yeah, potentially they could park at that location, yes.
Yeah.
The reason that I have raised it is that because most properties are closed, we have been seeing an increase in that use of the frontage, that antisocial and illegal use of the frontage, which is a specific risk, which I think people felt that people accessing at night when there are unlikely to be police officers around, or traffic wardens certainly, that there was increased risk.
Okay, and my last question, thank you for that, Councillor Slade, is with regard to, we've had no submissions from our responsible authorities, and that is Dorset Police, that's our Environment, and that's the Licensing Authority itself. So Environment with regard to some of those issues that you told us about around littering and around antisocial behaviour, and with regard to the police, with regard to drunken behaviour, perhaps loutish behaviour. And I was just wondering why you believe that there was such, to an extent, that this would cause an extra problem when we'd not heard from the responsible authorities. What were your experiences with regard to working with the responsible authorities around these areas?
So I speak as a councillor, but also as the chair of the Neighbourhood Watch, and have had a lot of experience with issues of shoplifting. Last year I had to spend quite a lot of time with Marks and Spencer's. They have given up calling the police for issues of particularly alcohol-related shoplifting. There was a case, you may recall, about 18 months ago where there was a significant amount of champagne stolen, and I think there were some rather unfair jokes made about the nature of shoplifting in Broadstone at the time. I've had social media contact in the last 24 hours since this went into the newspaper that I was going to be speaking today, from members of staff at Tesco who said they have given up calling the police over shoplifting. So I'm not surprised you haven't had calls, anything from the police, because we have very little police coverage in the area. That has reduced dramatically over the last few years, and even the small sweet shop says that yes, they do regularly have alcohol stolen, they just don't bother reporting it anymore. So that in itself is something which is a problem. We do have issues of antisocial behaviour this year. It's obviously been a lot better because of the lockdown. There have been fewer people sort of hanging around, but as with all communities, there are groups of younger people primarily who use the space outside Tesco's to cause a little bit of mayhem. So you don't tend to find that elderly people go out into the evening, and they will write to me and say, we won't go out late at night because we don't want to feel intimidated. Marks and Spencer's closes at 8 o'clock, primarily because its trade later would be inadequate to justify opening it. Tesco Express is the only place that's open beyond 8 o'clock in Broadstone. So this would actually introduce a facility which has a significant capacity for gatherings, with the community shelter directly opposite, that would be open late into the evening, and that I think that is why there is seen to be a risk, because of its capacity for gatherings.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. I have no further questions for Councillor Slade. Just returning to members. Any further questions, Councillor Flagg?
No, thank you, Chair.
And Councillor Burton?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I think that we've heard quite extensively with regard to all the points regarding this application. And if there are no further questions, I'll just check with our licensing senior officer. Sarah, do you have any questions?
No, I don't, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, and points of fact which would be useful, especially around that the responsible authorities matter there, but you have no questions, so thank you for that. So having heard from all parties, you now all have an opportunity to sum up with regard to what you've heard and to bring in any points of fact that you so wish and what you've heard from the other party. So we always go person going last, going first. So Councillor Slade, you're back on.
Chair,
So,
Chair, I'm so sorry to interrupt. It's Jill in Democratic Services. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Can we just check that Mr. Walsgrove has not got any questions?
Did I not ask Mr. Walsgrove? I do apologise. I do have his name here. Yes. Mr. Walsgrove, do you have any questions of Councillor Slade? If you can keep them to questions, please, and not iterate, I would be grateful. Thank you. Do you remember that Councillor Slade is a councillor, not a lawyer? Thank you.
I don't, thank you, Chair. I would have jumped in. I realise you hadn't asked.
Well,
me,
I apologise or not. I have your name in lights here, and I haven't called you. Thank you, Jill, for that reference. So moving on then, back to where we were. Councillor Slade, you have as much time as you need to sum up with regard to what you've heard and to bring your points forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I've probably covered everything. I do recognise that as a licensing committee, you know, you are very limited in specifics, and that message has gone out to the community. The post office in its current substantive form is a core part of what is available in the area. I am extremely disappointed with what's been brought forward as the alternative. I recognise that in a small community, a small post office, this is deemed as being adequate. This is by no means a small community, and this move from being a community facility post office with added retail to an off licence with a bit of a post office is unwelcome. The impact on the community is likely to be significant, and it is going to have detrimental impact on the health and well-being of the residents I serve. So my request is, if you are minded to grant this, that you consider very carefully a limited number of hours, so that local people have a limited impact from this development. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Slade. It's extremely nicely and succinctly put. So I was able to note that down as to what our consideration should be. Thank you very much indeed. And Mr. Walsgrove, in turn, you have all the time you wish. If you'd like to keep to points of fact, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as I said in my presentation, your determination must be evidence-based, and the evidence I put to you to take into account is the experience of Mr. Kumar, the fact that he's already got 2 shops operating in residential communities late at night, doesn't have any of the issues which the residents fear will happen, does not have people gathering outside his shops. That I think is a bit of an urban myth, that people hover around the lights of convenience stores like moths. He's got suitable measures in his application to promote the licensing objectives, and principally there's been no objections from the police or environmental health officer, and the police, if they had any concerns that this store was going to increase crime and disorder locally, I am sure they would have made a representation to you. The objection from the residents seems to be the change of use from what they've become used to as the post office closing at 5 o'clock to a convenience store. I just want to make the point about the terminology of an off licence. This isn't going to be an off licence that just sells alcohol. The terminology off licence is to express what the premises licence permits. It permits the sale of alcohol for consumption off the premises. So I've forgive me for my sort of generic use of terminology. I'm used to describing anywhere where you can drink on the premises as an on licence and anywhere where you have to take it away as an off licence. It is going to be a convenience store, a cost cutter convenience store, and alcohol is just a small part. The fact that the residents are unhappy that they're losing the current post office facility and are getting a smaller post office offering is not something which is relevant to you. And lastly, just a reminder about the ability to review, and that should give you the confidence that if you grant the licence, in the extremely unlikely event that those fears are realised, they can bring the licence back to you to review, this time on the basis of credible evidence, as opposed to just expressions of fear of what might happen, and actually a feeling that they just don't want this to open up as a shop late at night, which is not, as I said, something relevant to you. So again, on the basis of credible evidence, and that your determination must be based only on evidence, I ask you to grant the application.
Walsgrove, and I think you're referring to Thwaites there, where one cannot make a decision on something that might happen. I think that was your reference.
It was.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Sarah, did you have anything that you would like to add, please?
No, thank you.
No? Okay, thank you. So I'd just like to ask that all parties are content that you've had the opportunity to make representation, ask all the questions that you would wish, and have put forward all the points on behalf of your residents or your client. Is everybody happy? Councillor Slade, Mr Walsgrove, thank you. So we'll now conclude the hearing, and the subcommittee will adjourn in private with the legal advisor and the clerk to deliberate. Notification of the subcommittee's decision will be provided within the period of 5 working days, beginning with the day or the last day on which the hearing was held, which is today, in accordance with our COVID regulations, agenda item 4. The notification of decision will include information about the right of appeal as appropriate, and I would just ask that our legal advisor, Linda Coles, explain the right of appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there will be a right of appeal to the decision that's made today. That appeal should be made within 21 days of formal notification and made to Dorset Magistrates Court. All of the information about the appeal will be set out in the decision letter.
Thank you very much for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is now concluded, and we will retire and make our deliberations. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Slade and Mr Walsgrove, and those officers who will be leaving us. Thank you.